Hello and welcome to Mitchell's World. And I was recently asked to build a shelving unit for a friend of mine so he can put his storage bins in his basement. So I wanted to show you how I did it. Okay, and if you decide to build something similar to this shelf, just keep in mind that the measurements are going to be different wherever you build it. You're more than likely not going to use the same measurements as I did, because we made these shelves 36 inches outward or wide, and honestly, that a lot of people are going to make them a little smaller. It really all depends on what you're looking for. And we also made the shelves 11 feet long. So I had to make it cheaper so we wouldn't have to buy a bunch of sheets of plywood. I made a 4-foot long shelf, and then I made a 7-foot long shelf, and we combined it. Now this it made it easier to assemble, and it was cheaper. It didn't cost as much. We ended up using 3 pieces of plywood instead of having to buy 4, because we would have had to buy 4 if we made it any longer, at least the 4-foot one any longer. Okay, now first things first, the prices of the materials was around $130. Now that depends on where you are and the time of year, but around that is probably a pretty good estimate. That's how much we put into it, but it could be different for you, but I would say around that. So for the first step, I had to take the 2x4s and cut them into sections. And once I did that, I could lay them out and then screw them and make the shelving parts, so that later when we could take it to my friend's basement, we could assemble it using the legs and then just put it all together. And as you might see from my clips, I am not wearing the proper attire for any sort of construction work, but that's what I had on. And you may say that I have impeccable style, but I would recommend not wearing those things. Like the loafers and shorts doing this, probably not. Okay, so for the screws, I used 2.5-inch screws. Now that would be the smallest screw that I would use for that, the frame at least. But you should probably use anywhere from that to a 3.5-inch screw. The longer it is, the more support it's going to add to it. But then that could also increase the splitting in it if you're screwing it all the way through. It really all depends on your preference. Just make sure that this is stable before you put it together. And when I was putting it together, I used 2x4s for the entire shelving system of the 4-inch shelf, because the 4-inch shelf wasn't going to have as much weight on it. But for the 7-foot shelf, I put 2x4s on the side, and then I put a 2x6 in the middle, so that it would have more surface area and more support for those bigger loads that would be put on it. And when screwing these in, I would put 2 screws per each side for the 2x4s that go across, and then 3 screws on each side for the 2x6. Now if you don't want to use a 2x6, you don't have to. That's actually what I had, and I thought it would add some more support, which I really wanted, and it worked out. It could definitely hold my weight, just the middle one alone. So that could tell you right there that that is good for putting whatever you want on it. Well, most whatever you want. And now once the frames were all assembled, you could now transport it along with the legs that you had and the 1/2-inch plywood. Now once you transport it to where you're going to build it, now you can just put everything there and then build it there, but it worked for me to build it somewhere else and then go to where we were going to assemble it. So once you have all the materials set to go, I put the top shelf on the floor, and I put the 2x4s next to the edges where I was going to screw them in. As you can see, at the end of each shelf there's a gap. Now there's a gap of 2.5 inches so that I could put those legs on there and screw them in either way, whichever worked better. And it just helped it to make it to where I could support it easier. Once the top shelf is flipped on the ground and you screw in the legs, you can flip it up and then have someone support the middle shelf, and you line it up. You can mark it where you want to go. For us, I believe we put it at 36 inches from the ground, and we put it to where we wanted it to go, made sure it was level, and then we screwed in one corner and then screwed in the other corner so that it was fully supported. And then so if he had to move and rest from holding it, he could. And then I screwed in the other corners, and we had that part of the shelf. And once we worked on the other part of the shelf, the 7-foot shelf, I did the same thing, and we lifted the middle shelf up and we screwed it in all the sides, and we made sure that that was level and that it could handle some weight. And then once we did that, put on the plywood and screwed in on each shelf. The way I did that is I used 1.5-inch long screws. The longer the screw is, the stronger that hold is for that piece of plywood, and it won't rip off as easy. And I didn't really have any rhyme or reason to where I put each screw for the plywood. Typically you put one in each corner, but then you can do whatever you want for the front and back and sides. Typically I think it was like every couple feet probably would be good. It doesn't really have too much effect if you put a bunch of screws in or just a little bit of screws. You don't need to go overboard with it. It's just do what you think is structurally sound and cost effective, because you don't want to put 1,000 screws in a piece of plywood. But once we did that, it was pretty much good to go. I just wanted to add some more supports, and we decided to put a support on the bottom. So on the back of the shelf, the very bottom, we put two 2x4s. We cut them to length and then screwed them on into the legs so that it would attach it as one cohesive shelf, and it wouldn't be as wobbly because it had some slight wobble to it. And once we did that, I had some 2x4 blocks that I had cut out. Now you can cut them whatever length. I wouldn't cut them smaller than 3 inches. I would cut them a little bigger than that. But once I took the blocks and I actually screwed these little blocks under where the shelves joint, so that when pressure was put on top, the block would have an extra little support so that it wouldn't just break and fall through. So it's just an extra safety precaution. I didn't put it on part of the 4-foot shelf. I did put it where the joints were, where I joined the 7-foot long shelf and the 4-foot long shelf, because I wanted to make sure that those would be able to handle the support of whatever load that's put on it. But I didn't put it on the side that didn't have the join, because for the 4-foot shelf you're not going to be able to put as much on it, and it's not going to have as much weight. If you want to, you can definitely put those blocks in and they'll add extra support. That's completely up to you. Okay, and when I joined the two shelves together, I made sure that they shared each shared a leg, or the two legs there. So I screwed in half of the side of the leg in the 4-foot shelf, so that it had small bit of room to screw in the other shelf, so that it would join together and you would save money on buying 2 more 2x4s and just have it as one cohesive unit that can support itself. Now the inside of these shelves were 35.5 inches. I actually have the plans here and I'll try to get a close-up of that for you. But we had, it was originally going to be 36 but ended up being 35, not including the legs. So that when I had the plywood, I could just slide that on and not have to cut notches into them and then to fit these legs. I could just slide it right in, zip it in with the screws, and all good. And when putting in the middle supports for the shelves, try to be as accurate as possible. You don't have to be dead on the nose, but if you can be in the middle, that would be the best, so it could support right in the middle and even support all the way through. And when screwing in the legs, make sure you don't screw into another screw that you screwed in for the actual shelf itself. That'll cause you problems. You want to avoid that as much as possible. You should probably I put 4 screws in each leg that attaches to a shelf. So on the top shelf I put 4 on this side, 4 on this side, 4 in the back, 4 in the back, and then I did that for the center shelf as well. That'll add a lot of extra support, which is definitely wanted. Okay, and thank you very much for watching this video. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what you thought about it. Did you think I needed a little more detail? Or if you have any questions on it, leave a comment. Let me know. And thank you again so much. Have a good one.